What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be talking about some conditions today across much of the Atlantic. As I've been kind of looking at the models, I've been kind of looking at the observations, and I've been noticing several very concerning signs for much of the hurricane season, particularly for the Caribbean and the main development region. So we'll be mainly talking about that today. But before we do that, I do want to briefly talk about Chantal. That is currently a post-tropical cyclone. It's causing a bit of a flood threat across parts of the mid-Atlantic. So let's go ahead and briefly talk about that. So here is post-tropical cyclone Chantal right here. Maximum sustained winds are 30 miles per hour. Minimum central pressure is 1,009 millibars. We currently have a flash flooding risk of about a slight risk right here. It kind of goes from outside of Washington, D.C. all the way to New York. Matt, I know you're watching this. This is going to be something you're going to want to watch as well, so be sure you pay attention to that. We'll keep you updated on it. So yeah, there is a flooding potential that we're going to want to take a quick gander at and take a quick look at. So we're going to need to see that right there. If you remember, turn around, don't drown, and it only takes a few inches of rain to wash away your vehicle. So that's the kind of stuff that we're paying attention to. This is the last time we're going to be talking about post-tropical cyclone Chantal, and the Chantal saga is pretty much over from this. But after that, as you notice, there's not going to be much development, at least for the next 7 days in parts of the Caribbean, or even, quite frankly, the MDR, the entire Atlantic right here. So what's going to be happening? What are we going to be paying attention to for the next little while? Well, we can go ahead and kind of start and look at the overall conditions that I'm noticing at this current point. Number one, we briefly talked about this yesterday. The intertropical convergence zone is getting more active, in part because of a more active MJO pattern that's going to start moving over there, in part because there's more moisture in that region and less Sahara dust. We can actually go ahead and show you the true color imagery. As you can see right here, yes, there is a little bit of Sahara dust in the Caribbean, as you're noticing, but it's not really as prevalent in parts of the main development region at this current point in time. Yeah, there are some over here in this part over here that we can take a quick look at in the subtropics and the northern tropics right here. But by and large, that's mainly staying outside of the MDR at this current point, and we'll have to pay attention to this. I actually want to go ahead and zoom in on this real quickly and shift over to the eastern Atlantic just to show you the true color at this point. As you can see right here, you can notice that Sahara dust is kind of moving off in parts of the tropics right here north of the Cabo Verde Islands at this current point. So that's going to kind of hinder some convection in that region right there. But granted, compared to where it is in where the main development region is, the main development region is at least 20 degrees north down to even 10 in that region right here, even further to the south as well. I'd say around 6 or 7 degrees north. It's really staying out of there at this current point, so we'll have to wait and see how these Sahara dust patterns go, but at least for the month of July, the Sahara dust is typically at its peak at this current point, at its apex, as much of it comes off. However, I've been noticing in the models and in the patterns going forward that we are noticing more Sahara dust instead of going into the North Atlantic in the near future, heading towards Europe, towards the Iberian Peninsula, towards France, and those regions as well. So we can go ahead and kind of dissect that a little bit, starting with this right here. So this is the European model. Let's go ahead and move to today's model. We'll start with the moisture component, and then we'll move on to some other conditions right here. So as you can see, there's a bit of a Sahara dust plume in parts of the main development region and a little bit in the Caribbean. And you're also noticing this stuff as well. That was kind of what we were highlighting in the satellite imagery. So let's go ahead and zoom in on this and kind of take a quick look at what we're seeing right here. So here's what we have with the Sahara dust. It's moving through right here. Take a look at these wind patterns right here. Take a look at these wind barbs off the coast of Europe and off the coast of Africa right here. And normally they would be more so northerly. They shift more so towards the southwest, more southwesterly, heading northeast right here. What that's doing right there is that's carrying a lot of the Sahara dust instead of into the North Atlantic and the subtropics and the northern tropical region as well to hinder tropical development. It's now carrying a lot of this dust up to Europe right here, and we're noticing more of those breakdown patterns that I'm noticing right here. You're noticing this high pressure system over here, the Bermuda high, the Azores high shifted a bit further to the south, and another high pressure system over here in northern Morocco right here, that's kind of allowing this dry air and the Sahara dust to kind of stay at bay pretty much, and stay in parts of Europe and those areas, allowing it to carry up to there. You're not seeing as much Sahara dust in the subtropics or in the northern tropics as well. Yes, you still see a little bit more at that current point. That's to be expected, but it's considerably less than what it was previously. And as you can see right here, the dust kind of, while it does remain in parts much of the Atlantic right here, it's in a lot more of a moist environment than what we were seeing previously, what we were previously anticipating at this current point. I was kind of predicting Sahara dust to dip by quite a bit, but I was not expecting this the amount of Sahara dust to drop like this, and for the the shift focus to shift towards more so Western Europe at this current point. You're looking at more dry air heading towards that region, towards the United Kingdom, Ireland as well. And what that's going to mean is that, at least in the long run, that's going to mean more tropical cyclone development is possible. At least the time for tropical cyclone development increases by quite a bit. So maybe instead of maybe like mid to late August when things start to explode, maybe late July to early August is when things start to explode across much of that region as well. Climatologically, hurricane season really starts to ramp up around August 20th. But ultimately, we could see a situation where it starts to peak and really starts to ramp up sometime in late July, sometime in early August. And we definitely could see a few systems potentially develop in the interim at that current point, but that would mainly be concentrated more so in the Western Atlantic, like similar to what we saw with Barry, similar to what we saw to Chantal as well. Maybe Dexter could be a situation where it kind of develops off the coast of the United States as well, and that current point. But ultimately, I would say, at least in terms of MDR development, we're not looking till mid July is when we start seeing a bigger opening, and then late July to early August is when we start getting unloaded with more conditions and unloaded with much favorable conditions, I would say. And the reason I'm talking about maybe this being more open for business earlier is not just because of the dry air, but also because of the wind shear as well. Taking a look at that for just a second. We'll do that, and then we'll shift over to precipitable water, because I want to show you just how much better the conditions are now than they were at this point last year, than they were, and quite frankly, how they are in a 30-year average. So, taking a look at the wind shear across much of the main development region is non-existent, and there is some shear that still exists in pockets, but it's considerably less than what we were looking at previously. We're going to have to pay attention to that as well. And taking a quick gander at this, the only area of concentrated wind shear that we have left is in the Eastern Caribbean Sea. That's kind of your dead zone for tropics for much of June, for parts of July. It's really around late July, early August when that wind shear starts to finally collapse and fall apart over there. But ultimately, you're noticing a lot more of an open MDR in terms of wind shear, and you're noticing a lot more of a fluctuation pattern across much of the Western Atlantic as well, which could ultimately allow for more tropical development to happen, because you're looking at less shear than what we were than average. You're looking at less volatile conditions. Also paying attention to the trade winds as well. Taking a quick gander at those, the 850U winds. The trade winds across much of the tropics, with the exception of the Eastern Caribbean, is much more favorable for tropical development. We're looking at weaker trade winds across the board. We're looking at some stronger trade winds in parts of the northern tropics and subtropics as well. So that's going to allow for the water temperatures to warm up in pretty much where we need them to warm up for development and strengthening to take place. That allows for ultimately a more concentrated setting long run in terms of where systems are going to develop and where ultimately we're paying attention to. Right here, the Gulf, absolutely, we're looking at much weaker trade winds over there. Expect considerably more warming going on in that region as well. And we've already started to see that too in the last few days, but we will get to that in just a second. But we looked at wind shear, we looked at trade winds. Also want to look at precipitable water, because, ladies and gentlemen, this is how much more moisture we have compared to what we have with the 30-year mean right here. This is a considerably more moist environment than what we were seeing previously. Like, compared to what we saw last year, it was a lot drier over here in the main development region. and a lot more fluctuative everywhere else. But this is a considerably more moist environment across the board compared to what we were seeing last year. And this is a way more moist environment than average, for sure, as well. Like, the difference between last year and this year is off the charts. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. There are less fail modes with this year than there were last year. There's less things that can ultimately bust a hurricane season, at least compared to what we saw last year. Last year, we were looking at a really explosive season early on, and yes, we had Beryl, but it kind of held kind of held weight for how the season was going to ultimately go. We still had very powerful storms, but we didn't have the 23, 25 named storms that we were originally forecasting. I think we had like 18 or 19 last year, but those were still very powerful regardless. And part of the reason as to why things didn't meet early expectations was because there were more fail modes. We had a dry region of the Sahara Dust. We had a lot of Sahara Dust, in parts of the subtropics. We had pretty much all of July being closed off for development in the main development region and in the Western Atlantic as well. We had stronger trade winds than what we were originally forecasting for, and that's ultimately what shut down development for much of July. But then we started getting into August, and then that's when things really started to ramp up with Debbie and then Francine. And then ultimately Helene down the road, and then Milton. It was an absolutely insane thing that ultimately happened. We saw a very explosive short-term situation, and the reason why was because, the environment was still pretty dry at that point. And taking a look at it now, you're not seeing that dryness anymore. You're seeing a lot more of a moist environment. Yes, maybe tropical development isn't imminent or anything like that, but if these trends do continue, this is why I am saying that late July to early August is when things could start to turn up considerably, instead of maybe late August when it typically is climatologically. We're looking at much less wind shear than last year. We're looking at a much more moist environment than last year, and ultimately less fail modes as well. We have a negative PNA that's going to strengthen the steering currents and potentially allow for more of these cyclones to crash into land. We're not going to see ultimately the situation where like we did in 2023, where we had a very active season, but a lot of the storms drifted out to sea after Hurricane Idalia, and that was because of a positive PNA, where ultimately it's weakened the steering currents and allowed for these stronger systems to kind of remain offshore. Instead, we're looking at a negative PNA, and that's what's going to put more of the Caribbean and in the Gulf region in the line of fire as well. That's why I highlighted it in the thumbnail as potentially the area for greatest impacts. At least in terms of the United States, the Gulf Coast poses the greatest risk this hurricane season for a pretty bad situation to happen, similar to what we saw last year, where we had, I think it was 5 named storms, 5 hurricanes make landfall all across the Gulf. We had Beryl in Texas, Debbie in Florida, Francine in Louisiana, Helene in the Florida Big Bend region, and Milton in Tampa Bay. So that's something to pay attention to and something to consider moving forward. Shifting over now to water temperatures and ocean heat content. Looking at the water temperatures right now, basically what we're noticing is across much of the Gulf region right here, we're really starting to see these water temperatures starting to turn up over the last few days or so. This is backed up to July 3rd, but if we go to the climate reanalyzer very quickly, it's considerably bounced back over the last few days. So this is July 3rd, then the 4th, and the 5th, and now the 6th. So this is about a day old or so, and you're really starting, even with this tiny map right here, you can tell that things are turning up across much of the loop current, across much of the Gulf, across much of the coastal areas as well. Just overall, things are getting very interesting and very crazy already over there. We're starting to see a more resurgence, and that is being helped by the weakened trade winds to allow for more warming to take place in that region. The Gulf is going to encompass I would say, in my opinion, the vast majority of the warming, at least in terms of the short term. But it's going to be Atlantic wide where the warming is going to be prevalent at. So what we are looking at right here, particularly, I would say the Atlantic Basin is going to be a pretty big winner in terms of how much more warming we have. But I would say the main development region, because of these much weaker trade winds, is going to be the big winner, where we potentially see areas of 29, maybe 30 degrees Celsius water temperatures across the board in that region. And I normally don't like to make assumptions like that, but given the patterns we are seeing, and given the kind of situation that we are dealing with, where we're already seeing pretty warm temperatures, we're going to have a situation where a lot of warming can take place at a very short amount of time. Just in the first 2 weeks of the model runs we're seeing, we're already looking at a much more warming favorable environment over there, and that's only going to allow more power to whatever develops over there. It's going to give tropical cyclones, I wouldn't say necessarily a better chance of development, but rather the storms that do develop, they're going to be more powerful, and they're going to potentially put more people at risk because of that power. And another thing that we need to pay attention to is the ocean heat content, because that OHC is only going to continue to surge across much of the main development region. We're already starting to see a bounce back surge in parts of the northwestern Caribbean. The Gulf is going to continue to surge considerably as well because of these weakened trade winds, because that water is only going to get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper down and add more depth. And if you add more depth to warm water, there's less for cooled water for the hurricane to really upwell, because basically, I've talked about this, their purpose is for hurricanes is typically what they do is they cool the waters. They allow for upwelling to take place, and cooler water follows as a result. We're not going to see as much upwelling potential at this current point as these waters get deeper, and these warm waters get deeper and deeper down. Also noticing how this is really starting to turn up once again. It's been turning up over the last month in the Atlantic Basin. That's going to potentially put more of the Mid-Atlantic, New England, and Canada in the line of fire as well. So ultimately, the conditions that we're seeing right here, this is potentially going to be a huge problem going forward. Now, I'm not saying, like I said before, tropical development is imminent or anything like that, but it's definitely a lot of red flags and a lot of warning signs that are really screaming at me compared to what we were seeing last year. Because like I said, last year we had the OHC. Last year we had Windshare that was starting to weaken considerably. The thing that stopped it, once again, was the dry air. This year, we're at an ahead of schedule wind shear. Yes, the water temperatures in the OHC aren't what they were last year, but because of how warm they are now, they don't have to be. And ultimately, what that's going to lead to is, like I said, water temperatures is much more of a constant than a factor. Same with the ocean heat content. That's more of a constant than a factor because of how warm that gets and how high the OHC gets. And now what we're seeing is a much more moist environment across much of the Atlantic. And this isn't just, just the subtropics or just one region of the Atlantic. It's the entire basin that is more moist than average. And also what you're noticing in the Sahara region, in the Sahel rather, in Africa, the monsoon season's really turning up over there. There's going to be more moisture over there than previously, and that is going to carry over to the tropics. And what that's going to do initially is, yes, you're not going to see development from these tropical waves coming off right now, but it's going to add to the moisture. It's going to add to the instability in the region. It's going to add to a lot more of a situation where ultimately, once the Sahara Dust fully lifts, and honestly, at this current point, it doesn't really need to fully lift for tropical development to really start taking place. Just enough of it needs to keep getting funneled into Europe, where ultimately the dry air aspect kind of cancels out and it gets mixed out. And at that point, it's go time. And I would say, like, normally when this happens with the Sahara Dust, it usually doesn't it starts to take place, at least the process starts to take place around early to mid-August, and then it completely collapses around late August or so. This year, I think we'll see that a month earlier, because we're already starting to see some of the Sahara Dust get picked up and lifted over to Europe. And now, what I'm saying at this point is it's only a matter of time before the rest of it gets picked up and stays away from Europe, stays away from the Atlantic, enough for tropical development to take place. And I think I'd say at this current point, late July to early August is when I think that whole thing is going to lift. The conditions are only going to get better from here, ladies and gentlemen, and that's something we'll keep you updated here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. If you want to help out, hang out, or ask us some questions, be sure to join the Storms United Discord server. The link to that is in the end screen. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.